call the meeting.
But are we certain that the elevator?
Oh, that's right, it may be.
Let me go down, I just heard the
Yeah.
door.
Yeah, we tried the back staircase, but the alarm sounded, so we thought better of it.
Yeah, he still said he need a fob.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Right, sure.
It's a loud alarm too, isn't it?
That'll get your attention, you know.
No, that wasn't.
Well, since we know Bill is going to tell us about the community support service division proposed thing, we ought to get started and roll call. We
Maybe
know.
that's Joe on right there. Anyone says Gene?
Yes.
Is that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Joe, are you there? We have to.
We have to allow him.
Enter him.
Yep, now he can unmute and mute himself.
Okay.
He can unmute. Joe, you're muted. There you go. Joe? Hello, Joe? Electron's not making any noise. So he's not
Well.
talking.
All right. Well, we know. Dean, we have everybody else present. Because because Bill just can't hold on to any staff, we don't have anyone from the city to take the minutes. Is anyone willing to just sort of keep a rough notes?
Doesn't have to be verbatim.
Yeah, no, not verbatim, rough notes, and then you can send whatever you've got to me and I'll try to also fill it in. But it would be good to have someone other than me trying to chair the meeting as well as try to take notes. So,
Yeah, I don't think we want to say that. Do we have a recorder?
It's all recorded.
oh, that's right.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, would I be able to get access to it? Okay.
All right. That'll be posted on our YouTube page.
Okay.
So you can just go and
Yeah, then I
scroll
can
through that at your own leisure.
Yeah, and we can go. Okay, great. I never even thought about that. Our agenda, do we have any additional deletions? I have a request that we take under the F2, police community relations, that we move that to the first item of old business in order to allow Bill to get to his next Zoom meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second? Second from John, okay, thank you. All in favor, aye? Okay, opposed, same sign. All right, we will do that. Then our minutes, October 6th, that should have been a part of the packet. Do we have any changes or corrections? I didn't see any, but
I move we approve.
okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second, please. Thank you. All in favor, aye? Okay, same sign if you don't like. All right. And public participation, I don't, oh, well,
They're not just, they're watching.
yeah, they're just watching. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we don't. How about old business then, our update under the police community relations. Bill is here to tell us about his design for this community support services division. And it sounds quite intriguing, and
Thank you. I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce this to you. I'm sorry I had to leave early this night, this Tuesday of the month is normally committed by me to Afton Township's board meeting. Afton Township is where Facebook is, I'm committed to the building, city right there. And when we moved the HRC meeting from last week to this week, that created conflict. So I have to be back for their Zoom at 7. The several pages that I gave you as a handout are a bit of a background piece that I made for you in collaboration with the Assistant City Manager, Josh Bolt. He and I, Police Department, other voices that have been in conversation about police reform for months have collaborated on a reconfiguration of how our police department performs a variety of functions, including community services. This will be new. We've had something called special services. That was basically broke down to 3 school resource officers and 3 community service officers, which are people that would go out and sometimes they did some downtown parking patrol, sometimes they opened car doors to people, sometimes they helped people get into their houses when they were locked out, and things like that. Pretty traditional, conventional stuff, not engaging necessarily with the community at large. So for reasons that we discussed here on a number of occasions, we're looking to do better than that. And rather than just take baby steps, I thought it was important for the community to take some longer steps. And what you see here is something that will be proven or not proven out over the next year, next budget year. A budget year goes with a calendar year. And if we, I don't know who does this, but I'm going to do it. If you go to the last page first. Next Monday night, I present the city's proposed budget to the city council and our finance advisory committee for review. And sprinkle through that budget document or some of the introductory graphics in most municipal budgets, and one shows an org chart for a particular department. If you were looking at last year's org chart, you would see special services as a little, almost an addendum to one side. I purposely, not just for optics, but for substantive reasons, wanted to put that in the middle of the organization's focus. So there is a little bit of optics there, but also, as you start reading through this, you'll see what we've done. We've taken those 6. Hey, Joe.
No, I apologize. I've been with you since the beginning, and I had time to for some reason, when I read Ruth's email this afternoon, I assumed that this was a Zoom meeting. I thought that was the point of the correction. So I'm sorry I'm not with you.
Thank you for joining us. And Joe, I have to make, I don't know if you heard, I have to make an early exit.
I did.
You heard that part.
Thanks.
So, and what I handed out here, I can make available to you. If you want, do you have my email address?
I'm not sure I do, Bill.
It's, if you just send me something, I'll tag this to it. This is just a very provisional document, not a final, just a working draft. It's bill.nicholas
Yes.
at cityofdekalb.com.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet. And what this is for you and others looking in and for the record is an elaboration, first a narrative version and then a chart or two here to show you in terms of the commitment of personnel, and also it includes the hiring, as you'll note as you get to read the narrative piece, the hiring of a couple of uniquely trained crisis intervention officers whose job is not to go to an incident and then disappear on traffic patrol because we're short. We're changing how we do things, and if we're going to do that, then people have to stick with what they're hired to do. So we have 4 commanders altogether. 2 of them will be devoting a lot of their time to this and the work that goes with it. And I threw in, just as a matter of being square, the resource officers and the CSOs as well, but the mental health workers will all be new, and there's a lot of elaboration to go, job descriptions and so forth, and who we can work with. We work with already, members already of our social service network. As you go on the other side, if this is a legitimate division, then we need to have its own dispatching and its own back office functions, office associates, that's what that means. So that's what we're aiming to do. The budget goes from about $650,000 to $2.2 million. The full-time equivalents, we've been pretty much, as I said earlier, the SROs, the CSOs, and the crime-free housing person and so forth. The full-time equivalents were about 8 over the last 3 years. We go up to just short of 20. So we more than doubled in commitment, and I wish I could say we could do more this year, but there's 2 reasons why we're not. One is, frankly, COVID has knocked us flat fiscally. We were down $4.5 million for the year based on what I presented to the council over the last month or so. I think if the hospitality businesses don't reopen between now and the end of the year, which is, this is their time, obviously, this is when they make most of their revenue, getting into the holidays, then we could be down another $500,000 or more. So I am struggling just to make services go, but I think it's a major commitment in spite of that. And then the other piece is we're working from a model that we've pulled together from research we've done here in Illinois and elsewhere. We know some things we don't want to do, and we're going to learn that whether or not what we want to do is actually going to work out. One thing we don't want to do, for instance, we have an embedded social worker right now. I won't name the community, but it's in Northern Illinois, and they made a very ambitious commitment to something like this, and it's failed the last year because it's just not using the personnel correctly, throwing social workers into really tense situations, so they're scared that they want to back out, or not using them in the situations that make some sense. Rather going to the critical incident, you engage people beforehand, you make connections, you make relationships, you check in, and so forth, and then you follow up. And that's some of that wasn't happening. But I think that throw people in and somehow things change. So a lot to learn, I want to stress, and we have to start at some point, and this is our proposal that will go to the council on Monday. As we work through the budget, we'll get to the police department, and then we'll spend some time on this, and then we'll proceed with other parts of the budget as the year goes along. That's what we have, and I realize I'm just throwing this at you, and I can't linger to have a long conversation about it, but I'm happy to answer any questions. In a few minutes.
Bill, the whole concept of establishing its own identifiable community support services division is, it obviously looks like it's incorporating the aspects of, community policing, the conversations we've had about the hopeful, positive thing of having a social worker available. I can't tell from, just the organizational chart. How do you think the day-to-day operation of this division might, what would you envision it would look like?
So we have, this is not just geared to an incident. In fact, I see that it not be, although they can react. Incidents will emerge as we talk to the social network that we continue to work with, have worked with for many years, safe passage, for instance, the Ben Gordon Center, the Family Services Agency, venture work, you know, name them all. We have a connection through our city organization and also the police department. So the important thing, Lisa said this and others have said it, you develop relationships, and you have to have relationships and trust before people will let you come into their life and whatever family issues they have or issues they have in life and need some help with. So we're not trying to be the Gordon Center or the Family Service Agency, but we are aware that there are some times when in people's lives, individuals or families, when things are crumbling, and do we want to wait until there's that 911 call? Do we want to intervene in some way, which is a collaborative way? And you know, when I say collaborative, that means we're in connection and we're working with other agencies in doing this. It's not we're alone, and we're just another loose cannon out there trying to do something. So the proof will be in how it works and the leadership and the direction that's given. And we need some talent that's had some experience in this. And I think initially the leadership, the collaboration, we're going to learn a little bit of learning by doing and a little bit, you know, preparation in terms of the professional experience.
If I may intrude,
Sure.
Larry, if that's okay.
Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
I think, and I apologize for not being there with you, I think this is a commendable step. We've heard from 3 police chiefs in Allen Grove in succession that a lot of our officers spend a lot of time with frequent flyers, with people who have issues, and oftentimes and develop a relationship with people who are troubled and build, you know, that sense of trust. But our police officers are not social workers. They're not, you know, I'm sure they're compassionate people, but they don't have that kind of training. And it takes an awful lot of their time. It takes them away from other places where other citizens might be in danger. And so I think to, you know, rely upon professionally trained people to deal with people who, you know, are having tough times is just an excellent first step.
Thank you, Joe. I couldn't have said it better. And, there's always some risk in starting like this. We don't have this shared experience of doing this through the police department. And I think what I want to stress is the police department on January 1st becomes just a fellow player, not necessarily a leader in this or an isolated actor, or else it won't work. I don't see how it works. That's our approach. And all of you and many other voices will be telling us where we rise or fall, and I think we have to listen to that, and we'll know in time also we have to create ways in which we're accountable for what we're trying to do here, so we can report to council, to you, to others. These are some of the areas in which we've been working, and this is the impact we're having. This is where we're falling short. This is where I think we're making some progress, and we learn together in this. I think this is a when I say community, I mean the whole town. This is just one piece of what I think we're trying to do. Let's get a few of these things, some of these important objectives going.
I got a quick question, just about training.
Yes,
So will
please.
these people be trained differently, separately, or is that going to be a part of the traditional police training?
That's an excellent question. So if you're a sworn officer, you go through the academy. Now that's a conventional route, right?
Right.
And then you're the department's employee. And there are some departments that are succeeding this because they're providing other training. And so training is important. Now, if we can solicit, because we're going to make some hires here, and 2 key hires are these critical incident officers. These are some people that have actually had experience with this. We're going to need to build around experience because we don't have it in our department here. that's my, and we may look back a year from now and say, boy, you couldn't have been more wrong, but that's what I think we have to do. We all have ideas of how this might work, but we haven't had the experience, the shared experience of how it's going to work. So we have to find that. We're doing it in a bubble, everybody's watching, and we'll have lots of help, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I've got a split.
Right.
This, stay tuned, this is
Okay.
first volley, and
Yeah.
maybe the narrative changes soon in the next month as we get through. I'm pushing to get something into the budget and on the docket
Right.
by the end of the year. So, okay.
Okay,
Thank you
thank
all.
you, Bill. Appreciate you sharing this with us. And
Now, there's one other thing. May I just add
Sure.
two other things connected. We've talked about two other things. One is, what are we going to do about a search for a permanent police chief, and another is, we haven't come back to this for some months, and that is, are we going to have some type of a critical incident review board? It's sometimes called a citizens review board, and something where the community gets to sit at the table and talk about. And the answer in both cases is yes. And my inclination right now is to include the new chief. Well, first of all, if the council approves something like what I handed out, now we have a different department profile of responsibilities, position, and so forth, accountability, that we need before we go out on a revised search. But with that, then I'd like to go out. And then as we begin to get candidates who have worked with a reconfigured department like this, we get to learn also, have they had any experience with such a board, and what has it been, and what do they have suggestions. I would like that new chief to be involved in not necessarily the early research, but in the creation and and certainly the implementation. Because that's got to be that person's, and the command staff that person works with, that's going to be a key responsibility. I'd like to hear from people who are going to be applying for this job. So, I may be wrong, and some people say that's the cart before the horse, but I think that's important.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so more to report.
Good, okay.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Larry, I just want to go on the record if I can. I think this can be an excellent step towards the decriminalization of mental illness, really, which is what's happened in the last 30 years as we've just sort of closed down psychiatric units here at Kishwaukee and elsewhere, and just chase people out into the street without any kind of help. And what happens is those people might be jail, overnight or for a week or for a few days, and we can actually connect them to the help that would be useful. And we're doing some real good stuff here.
Yeah. I think so. Any other comments or anything? Okay, well, I imagine we can all tune in for Monday's council meeting. It sounds like this will get presented as part of the budget review. Okay. Going back to our landlord tenant area, we were fortunate that Norton was able to connect with the NIU Law School, and maybe you can give us a summary or kind of...
Yeah, well, the law school, their clinic is interested in working with us. Larry put together a list of things that we would hope they could do, which I passed along to them. They said they're still interested. We didn't scare them away. And that's basically giving legal advice. If a class action is appropriate, maybe consulting on that. Assisting tenants with pursuing legal actions, helping organize or incorporate the Tenants Association, working with us to draft a common lease, provide workshops and other help we might be able to give us and the tenants of the Tenants Association. We proposed that Larry and I meet with them. They said that would be fine, so we haven't set that up yet. No. They just got back to me on Friday. Said they were willing to do that. So over the next month or so, we will hopefully be able to do that. And we'll have a better sense of what they can do.
Yeah, and Norton, for my benefit, I'm not sure I'm very familiar with the law school's clinic. I was aware that Prairie State used to be at Northern or something and would provide some legal advice, and is there a campus office of legal advice or something?
There is a
still?
student, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's that.
Yeah, okay, but what we're talking about is a little more, I guess, involved in being able to deal individually with certain tenants and problems, perhaps get the Tenants Association incorporated, things like that,
Yeah, very honestly, I don't know what all is entailed. I know from other law schools, it's like a little law firm that students work for under the supervision of a director. And, but I'm not sure who qualifies as a client or how that all works. I also did contact Prairie State, and they have a lot of issues in terms of what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll pursue with that, but I don't think that their funding limits the kinds of things they do.
Yeah, haven't they said that they can't really do any help with a class action kind of
Definitely
thing?
they can't do it.
They can't, their funding just doesn't come. Okay, all right.
And I would guess if when we meet with the director of the law school clinic, whose name is Paul Cain, C-A-I-N, that he'll have a better sense of what they are probably doing.
Okay.
Norton and everybody else, if we can get an institutional commitment from NIU, that's great. Because
Yeah.
I mean, we're dealing with an adversary here who plays rope-a-dope. We just sort of, our city attorneys have limited time and resources, and they'll just wait it out and they'll just wait it out. And if we've got a legal clinic that'll say, okay, so our students will graduate and we'll get this lawyer here, and they'll keep on doing the same thing. It takes 5 years, it takes 6 years, then all the money you want. That's really what we need.
Yeah, and I think from what you're saying, Joe, as well as our discussion at the last meeting, that's the concept behind the use of this clinic. So I think it probably then the next step is, as Norton says, is we should try to meet with them and go over in a little more detail things, even maybe broaching logistics, how do we, and all that. So, sounds good. Thank you for getting that initiated. And then we have our continuation with Dear Chapter 10. Now, I hope you were all able to look at the notes in red from the Chapter 10 that I had passed out at the last meeting. I thought we would just go through that and just talk a little bit about each thing. You guys may have jotted down some notes and said, hey, in this section, why don't we also consider this, you know, or whatever. And I was in touch with Jacob Moss, the DeKalb Tenants Association. I sent him a copy, and he looked it over, and I'll pass you out his remarks, and we can take them up as we go through the document.
These are for me?
Pardon? No, they're just one page.
Oh. Oh, there are two, I don't know.
No, one percent down there.
What happened?
Oh.
So maybe it's for this one. You give what?
I just, you know, pass out more than needed. Okay, if we take the lovely chapter 10, and my first note was on the page 2, which is under 10.03 scope. I just made a note that the third point under A, you know, residents of property wholly owned by the state or federal government or by the DeKalb County Housing Authority, they're exempt from application of this chapter, the following. However, that makes it sound like they can do whatever they want to do. That's why I put the note, but these properties must follow the state and or federal rules published by these governmental entities, you know, as far as housing goes. So that was my reason for the note.
So there, where are you now?
I'm with the chapter 10 at the very beginning. And on the second page, this is under the scope. The first 10.03A under scope is saying that it doesn't apply to the following, are exempt from it. And it lists them and then, you know, talks about housing authority or state or federal government. And my only point was to add into that last sentence something to the effect that while number 3 listing is exempt from this chapter 10, it must follow its own state and federal rules. For instance, as you know, if you're talking about housing authorities, HUD, nationally, and everything, there are a lot of rules and scenarios for that kind of housing. So I was just suggesting putting in something so it doesn't make it sound as though the DeKalb County Housing Authority is exempt from, you know, anything, which is not the case. But that was just the thing that caught me. And I don't know if anybody found anything else on this second page. It's just that definition of business. And then we go to page 3 and the code violation disclosure 10.06. My thing there was, my note was adding to that last sentence under 10.06 that we had heard a lot of discussion from the Tenants Association. All meetings that I was at with the Tenants Association, this was brought up. The concern to empower tenants to be able to deal with things, you know, have some more rights. So I added, in light of that, at the end of that section, after it says failure to comply, you know, be punishable by a minimum fine of $100, and the tenant has the right to unilaterally terminate the lease, which is what I heard from the tenants. and some of our discussion. So that's what that's about there. Then under 10.07, the tenant's right to a copy of the lease. I tried to change language throughout this document to where it could be should do or will, is encouraged to provide, you know, or whatever, to make it more forceful. So I just got there, every tenant must receive a complete copy of his executed lease. And then what time is that? And then we get our first note from Jacob on that handout I gave you. He talks about in 10.09, the landlords and tenants both must sign the lease. He apparently has seen a number of situations where the landlords didn't sign the lease, and then they used it as an excuse when there was a complaint from the tenant that they didn't have to do anything because they never signed it, even though they obviously took the money. So I added, having gotten Jacob's things, I added with some notes to myself here that that the lease must be signed by tenant and landlord, and tenant's lease copy must contain the landlord's signature. Because apparently the tenant association is telling us it's a problem not to have, for the tenant not to have a copy that is also a copy that has the signature of the landlord or property owner. So I was going to try and reword that and add that in. Also, once again, I clarified, or I tried to, under 10.07, the minimum fine of $50, and we know that even if that's levied, it's practically impossible to collect. We don't have the staff personnel to really take care of all that. But I just wanted to say, well, what is it? Is that a one time or whatever? So I just proposed for every week of non-receipt, and define when the week starts. And, you know, chime in along here if you've got questions or you've looked over something and you think we should even add something more, or, you know. 10.08, Landlord Tenant Handbook. Sort of pause here. Some of us have discussed that when you sit down, and you do have to carve out some time to read the Tenant Landlord Handbook, in my opinion, it's quite involved to go through it all and see certain things repeated, be it for the tenants or the landlords. But when some of this language is repeated, it's not always worded the same. I found that difficult for the layman's, eyes, or I'm thinking in terms of an 18, 19-year-old tenant signing their first lease. That's something that I think needs to be addressed. The other part of that is there's several suggestions, and Jacob with the Tenants Association stated in this email back that he thought separate documents for the tenants, for a tenant's handbook and the landlord's handbook might be a good idea. Because so much of the same laws and regs are referenced in the tenant section and the landlord section, pretty much everything's going to be included in the tenant one. So what's they're needing, so it's the suggestion is that we seriously consider having two, and then I think we want to discuss when we look into more about a common lease, and that maybe we can get some help with NIU, that the tenant's handbook section become a required attachment to the lease. Not this thing, there's things in here about, you know, they have to have certain things either posted on the board in the apartment complex or whatever, but it's clear that if we do a separate handbook for the tenants, and if we try to clarify the language a little bit, I think it's worthy of having it right with this the lease agreement. And I don't know if you can think of a reason that we wouldn't necessarily separate them. I'm trying to think if there's any, you know, sections on that we would put in on the rent refusal business and all that would, you know, are would be, I hope, clear statements. Okay, then for what was it? Then of course we get to the rental agreements and
Well, before you, on 1009, it talks about certain terms and it talks about the amount of lease. None of that is there, so you really need to.
you're at 10.09?
10.09.
Yeah, we've all, for the past few months, not been able to find the Appendix B, which is the model DeKalb lease. Now, it does exist, and why it hasn't gotten up on the website, I don't know. Or it may be there now. But here is that particular Appendix B. So obviously we're recommending that it actually be sure to be attached. And then when we're on this one, if you haven't looked at the DeKalb model lease or whatever, you know we have also quickly scanned the City of Evanston's common lease. The thing I've discovered with the Evanston one, which was one we could compare, because there are certain tenant rights, so to speak, that are in the Evanston one that we may want to include. But what they do with their common model lease is they just reference all of the landlord and tenant regulations. And that is a separate document. And it's about 18 to 20 pages long. So you can't really review the Evanston model lease agreement unless you are also looking at their ordinance, or what they call their Evanston Residential Landlord and Tenant Ordinance. So I was just going to say, if someone would like to really pour over in more detail the Evanston one, and you can easily compare it to the DeKalb one, I certainly will provide you with the printouts and the whole, whatever, 30 pages. That would be very helpful if you
trust that you were in the law school in Norton might
Okay,
do a thorough job.
all right. All righty, well, we'll keep that alive and see what we can do. Then, let's see. As I had told you at the last meeting, my notes on the 10.10B, I had read it wrong. That's why I thought there was a problem. There isn't. And under C, which is the following page, page 4, I think we should change that last sentence under C. It says the crime-free lease provision shall be in substantially the following form. And there's such a form at the end of the tenant handbook. I just don't like substantially. It just allows too much leeway. So, okay, I'm a landlord and I'm going to just allude to it. You know. So I think we either have to place the crime-free form right here, or let's refer to it as another appendix. What I think the city has done is, for C, they've basically taken whatever is the original, the crime-free housing ordinance, and they've simply reproduced it in this section.
Although what's here is not identical to what's in Appendix A, so it's confusing.
Oh, the crime-free housing, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of editorial work, you know, how you find different areas in somebody's thesis or whatever where they're using different terms and they need to, you know, there's a lot of that going on. And I don't know if that means that some different people wrote different parts of this, I don't know. But once again, you know, we'll want to check the crime-free housing section here to actually be what the crime-free housing wording is. And then on page 5, it continues on with the crime-free housing and gets down to area 6. And what is that? Number 4 there at the end, it uses the wonderful chocate wording, which is written. I don't think most individuals will right off the hand go, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means. So we may want to. It's talking that it's an offense to be preparing for or seeking to commit another crime. So anyway, that's just me. Then I think I gotta check with this stuff. Then on page 6, if we, the D there, where it's, I had a note at first a few months or so ago, if you're developing a uniform required lease, then do we, need these kinds of clauses? In other words, in a uniform contract lease, we could automatically have in it the wording about the landlord's rights to ban guests. That's what that was about. So in other words, if we decide that we do want to go for a common lease, we sort of create that, then that means we'll go back and, look at the whole thing. So anyway, that's what those were. Failure to comply with this section shall be punishable by a minimum fine of $250. I assume that's applying to the landlord. I can see some of our tenants reading it and saying, what? And under 10.10, my only note there was just this business of confessions of judgments. Let's just extend the sentence to be clear on who it's talking about. And then on page 7 at the top, my note was, it says in there that this particular thing is punishable by a fine. But unlike other sections, it doesn't specify what the fine is, So that's just a note that maybe that would be beneficial. It's not that we're able to necessarily collect. That's a given about a lot of things. 10.12. The end of lease inspection. It says here, rental unit may require an inspection with the landlord. Goes on to talk about appearing and what happens if one party doesn't, there's a $50 fine. Because things have gotten so litigious, I would suggest we define what a good cause might be, giving examples. And Jason from the Tenants Association basically realizes that enforcement is particularly challenging for this end of lease inspection. He realizes it's not going to be something that is greatly enforceable. The other concept there would be that if we require it, if we get the council to change the ordinance in this section and say that an end of lease inspection is required, we of course know that X percentage of all the renters will leave town beginning of June, end of May, and their lease might be up at whatever, the end of May or June 15th or something like that. They're not coming back for an inspection. So I don't know that that's gonna help. Jason under 10.13 sort of sounded like he thought a 24-hour notice was a little more reasonable than just this 1-hour notice. And he seemed to focus a little bit on the actual inspections. At least wanting, I think, for inspections, that be the Board of Health, that be the city or governmental agencies, that one certainly have 24-hour notice. And we could adjust accordingly.
I'm sorry, I thought that there is a requirement for a 24-hour notice.
Not with this section on landlord access. There's some other uses of 24 hours, and right off the top of my head.
I just think most of the places are there, and I'm ready.
Yeah. Right. And we may want to. And then, of course, they say that under C, under the landlord access, they say, while the tenant and landlord may not have a problem with the landlord having access essentially at any time, as long as there's mutual consent. Currently, such consent cannot be included in a lease and cannot be made a condition of renting a unit. I can understand it not being a condition of renting a unit. It almost makes it sound like they can't do just something at the spur of the moment because they go see each other in the hall. But I don't think it really means that. Under 10.14,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
basically, I'm suggesting when you read the actual State of Illinois Act, the Security Deposit Return Act, I think it should be simply put there. And minimally, it needs to be referenced in this document as the actual state law about all this. In all my training, and you guys know how particular our educators are about documenting where you got something from or not. I find it a bit astounding that this section of the State of Illinois law was never explicitly referenced in a sort of summary paragraph of what it is. But that's, so I would strongly suggest that we replace that. Then,
He talks about the towing, like if you're behind in your rent, landlords tow your car. What type of?
That don't make any sense, because if you, like, how they, that's
That's a problem.
just straight.
yeah, I'm not sure how we.
Like, that ain't make any sense.
Yeah, I wasn't pleased to hear that either. This business of the towing of cars, if you're a landlord, and I'm sort of thinking out loud here, so, chime in. If you're charging for your complex's parking, a monthly charge, the terms of your, I don't know, whatever it is, you separately have an apartment leasing agreement. So I would advocate that we simply have something put in that says you're prohibited under those lists of things that landlords are prohibited from doing. We simply add something to the effect that those are considered separate agreements. And if the apartment rent isn't being paid or is behind or whatever, that's a separate issue from taking away the already paid for parking rights. And I would say there's somewhere in here I think we can put that. Now, that the...
Well, I need to go to work
To
to
get your
make my
money.
money.
Right.
And then you tow my car.
Right.
And
Right. Oh, yeah. This is,
You just keep getting behind.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do agree
That's
with that.
criminal.
Yeah. So, Jacob says that right now, this is the number one complaint he's hearing, is people having their cars towed.
Yeah.
So my suggestion there is we'll probably need to add that in to chapter 10. Okay. On page 9, which is still a part of this section 10.14 obligations of landlord, I just wonder if, and it's a gray area about, did the landlord substantially modify what they're doing, et cetera, too. And they're, so what do I do as a tenant? So the tenant gets notice of these changes, and if it's really modifying the substance of the lease things, so who can the tenant call aside from protesting to the landlord? So that's why I have my note there. Can the code compliance department with the city be a resource for finding out if a third party, an independent third party, like the code compliance department, thinks that the modification is a substantially modifies the lease? Otherwise, I wonder how many of these little written by the ways have been going on. But that's the reason for my note. And that's the type of thing that, again, I know the city will simply say, we don't have enough, for every one of those things that some tenants receive, I don't know that we can handle all of the things or not. But that's an ongoing dilemma we have. And part of my response is, if the city has had interns from the Masters of Public Administration program, can't the code compliance department see if they can get interns? There is a lot of just record keeping, following up with phone calls to the landlord or the property owner. I would propose to the city that they seriously look into the possibility of having some interns. They could be folks that are interested in law enforcement. They could be folks that are out of the Masters of Public Administration. But I do think that in order to provide a little more responsiveness from landlords, I think we're going to have to help the city solve some staffing issues there. Then on C, disclosure, you saw that add the name, address, and telephone numbers. And Jacob urges that we add a requirement for emails with all of that. I believe that the disclosure section C, number 4, I don't believe, as I think we heard from Jacob, or maybe I heard it at a tenants meeting, that hardly any landlord is disclosing before you sign the lease that they have been cited for code violations.
Does the city keep track of that? Because maybe the city can have that information.
Well, the city, if they're actually registering a code violation. Obviously, the landlord, property owner, whoever gets cited with that violation.
No, I'm wondering, Larry, if the city keeps it someplace. So say I want to rent from
They,
property X. Could I call and go, hey, I'm trying to rent a property X?
yeah, I know,
Are there some violations that I should be aware of?
yeah.
Public information?
Yes, I'm sure it's public information. If you've got a paid employee that's from taxpayer dollars and someone, a landlord, has been cited, that citation and all that is public record. So there is a, like, can I look that up on the database or that type of thing? But this is something that with a common lease that's required, we could build in a small section to list the code violations. And if none, say none, And then if they're not listing them, it's even another document that,
Is it possible to maybe put that stuff someplace public? Right, so I shouldn't have to go to property A to see whether or not they have code violations. Maybe I can look that up on the city's website and see that property A has 12 and property F has 2.
right.
And then I can choose even before I go. And that would save me energy and time.
Yeah, right, it's a good suggestion. So I'll put a note there. That's another thing with the city's website that would be nice. So if I'm within the city code enforcement division, so what you're saying is, okay, I find out maybe it's a call from a tenant, and I go and inspect, and yes, indeed, you write them up for the code violation, and you're going to simply go back and enter that
Right,
in the system.
right. And then anybody can see, right? So that it's public. So
Yeah.
a poor landlord,
Right.
for people that know that this information exists, would know to go, and thus we wouldn't move to that property.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, in enacting all this, there's all the details. Okay, some good landlords, they have a violation, but they tend to have it all cleaned up within 10 days. So, eliminate it. If you don't, within the time frame that would all be specified, then the city will get it. But anyway, those are details. But I still like the idea, because it's the landlords that are ignoring the violations and the fines that are the ones we want to be seen. Okay. Okay, and I think that's pretty much his comments.
For the sake of, is there a lot more to go through there?
No,
I think
no.
if you and North are going to meet with the law school, and
Yeah.
the clinic or potential clinic, some of this seems like lawyer stuff to me.
Well, it is, and I don't need to really go over anymore. The only thing I would say is on page 10, I've already written in pencil to try to add something in this section, what the landlord can't do, something to do with separating out that a paid parking permit is a separate contract from an actual lease agreement. Therefore, one cannot tow the car just because there's a...
Right. Yeah. I can't even see yeah, that's a whole situation.
That's like, how do you expect me to get somebody?
Yeah, well, and that's the situation. I mean, I think that when they tow your car, people are towing the car park for a violation of something related to parking, or you don't have a sticker,
Right.
and not because, you know, he's not paying his rent to his car, like, that's criminal.
Well, it's a self-defeating minimally, and it may also be considered criminal if you were to try to litigate it and indicate that from a contractual standpoint, that my parking fee in no way is anything other than allowing to park. It has nothing to do with
Well, I mean, even if
my
you
rent.
say, you know, my rent is $400 and $10 a month every month is parking. So technically, I can pay you $10 and keep the other $3.90. And so my car can stay on the premise.
Yeah.
I just can't see a towing company going, oh, we're towing this car because they didn't take the rent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Okay.
Anything else with the Code 10 that struck you guys when you looked it over, aside from, it always makes my eyes roll in my head, I have to really try to stay focused on the words and everything.
I will just add, Larry, there's got to be a special place in heaven for you to putting all this due diligence into it.
Well, I appreciate that, Joe. I certainly,
You're never a practice test, that's it.
yeah. Well, I was just, all I can say is personally, having attended 3 of the Tenants Association meetings and listening to some of the residents' stories of not getting things fixed and getting the outer door locks changed, and then of course they can't get in at all. Just on and on, stuff like that. It really helped put the energy into things like this.
Thanks for doing it.
Yeah. Okay. With that in mind, and we already have Bill to his report, what do you think should our next step be when, it may well be before a December meeting, I'm not sure, with the holidays coming up and all. But if we also ask about getting any assistance from NIU's a legal intern program or whatever, with helping to clean up anything, or, you know, this is an example of something that would be helpful, you know. And I know when it comes to the tenant's handbook, obviously they'd be hopefully helpful. If that's an okay, we'll raise all of that too. Okay. Then I was going to have Bill report on the belonging. I think, Lisa, you were part of that.
Yeah,
I think, Joe, you were part of the belonging thing. I thought it went very well. I thought it was helpful to have a little broader sort of perspective on the range of belonging and things like that. And it made me want to start reading some of his stuff. Of course, the first book I got was more historical, legal thing, but those, Lisa, did you have any? You know,
I liked it. I've seen him speak in another venue with the lady named Bell. And I just thought the concept of belongingness and othering was important. Still think it is, and powerful. And I think he used some excellent examples when he talked about town and gown and the distinctions and the importance of building bridges, because that's I think the most important piece is to build a bridge from one side to the other. And I think that allows for some give and take. You know, we can go from both sides. Hopefully, you know, folks will pay attention. I think the beloved community that exists in DeKalb is one outlet for people who are interested interested
Mhm.
in those kinds of conversations and activities. And ideally, I mean, and that effort with Dr. Powell was actually a joint venture between the city of DeKalb
Right.
and the university. So that in and of itself was a bridge.
Yeah,
So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
I too was positive about it, and I hope that the follow-up, there will be some concrete kinds of activities that maybe can get started.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It's good stuff, I think.
I would say activities, and I'm sorry not to interrupt you, Lisa. I'm in my own little.
No, I'm good, Joe, I'm done.
we know, Joe, it's no different. We're used to you being in your own little world.
Well, no, I think Dr. Powell does an excellent job. I think he does an excellent job of making a distinction between belonging and inclusion,
Mhm.
and what the limitations of inclusion often are. Yeah, you all come and be like us and think like us and
Mhm.
so forth. One of the things I've seen him talk about are efforts to create some sense of belonging between Israeli Jews and Palestinians. And there's a cafe in Tel Aviv that as an Arab and a Jew come in and they actually have lunch together. Their meal is 50% less. The owner charges them half price. I'm not necessarily suggesting something like that would fly with local businesses, but in addition to opportunities, I wonder if we could think about some incentives for building the kind of bridges that we need to build.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know what they would be, but that just seems to be like, that's a good idea.
Right. Okay. Well, we don't have any new business that I'm aware of. So unless any other questions or anything,
I'll move we adjourn.
wait a second. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? And thank you, Joe, and thank you to the other, I guess, the Daily Chronicle and Scott and Kiara Fraser for tuning in and listening for the meeting. We appreciate it. And we will say good night.